Do you think ignoring a Gemini is something simple? That they'll just move on, pretend nothing happened, or maybe chase after you? The truth is, when you ignore a Gemini, you're not dealing with someone ordinary. You're dealing with a mind that is extremely active, curious, and emotionally deeper than it appears. And what happens next, almost no one tells you. At first, it may even seem like nothing has changed. Gemini remains light, communicative, maybe even a bit distracted. But internally, something has already started to shift. They observe. They analyze. They connect dots you can't even imagine. And here's the detail most people get wrong. A Gemini's silence is never empty. It's strategic. When a Gemini realizes they're being ignored, they don't react in an obvious way. No immediate drama, no exaggerated confrontations. Instead, they start to change gradually. And those changes are subtle, but extremely meaningful. You might think they moved on quickly, but in reality, they just changed frequency. And that's when things start to get interesting. Because while you think you're in control of the situation, the Gemini is already one step ahead, reorganizing feelings, redefining priorities, and most importantly, deciding, without saying a word, what your place will be in their life. And when a Gemini decides something, they rarely go back. In this video, you're going to discover the 5 things that really happen when you ignore a Gemini. Some will make perfect sense, others might surprise you. But the fifth completely changes the game. It's the kind of thing that makes you realize that maybe ignoring a Gemini isn't as harmless as it seems. So stay until the end, because after this, you'll never see a Gemini the same way again. Have you ever ignored a Gemini and thought nothing would come of it? Because here's the truth. Gemini is not a simple sign to deal with. It's intense, unpredictable, and often completely misunderstood. And when you ignore someone like that, you're not just creating distance, you're activating something much deeper. For some, Gemini is cold, indecisive, someone who changes all the time. But for others, it's one of the most intelligent, adaptable, and emotionally complex signs in the entire zodiac. And that's exactly where the mistake lies. Because what looks like disinterest is often protection. What looks like change is actually evolution. And when a Gemini realizes they're being ignored, they don't react the way you expect. In this video, you're going to discover the 5 things that really happen when you ignore a Gemini. And the last one completely changes how you see this sign. Each one reveals a deeper layer of the Gemini mind, until it reaches a point that almost no one understands. If you like understanding zodiac behavior on a deeper level, go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps bring more content like this. Now pay attention, because this goes beyond the obvious. They observe more than they react. When you ignore a Gemini, the first thing you need to understand is this. Their silence is not the absence of reaction. It's the beginning of a process. Unlike what many people think, Gemini doesn't act on impulse when they feel ignored. They don't immediately chase, don't create a scene, don't try to force answers. Instead, they do something much more subtle. They observe. And they truly observe. They start paying attention to details that used to go unnoticed. The frequency of your messages, your response time, the tone of your words, shifts in behavior. For many people, this may seem excessive, but for Gemini, it's natural. It's part of how they understand the world. Because the Gemini mind works like a radar. While you think you're just giving space or being indifferent, they're already connecting dots. They remember how you used to be, compare it to now, notice patterns, inconsistencies, subtle changes in energy. And here's the most important point. Gemini doesn't just observe what you do, they observe what you stop doing. Silence, to them, communicates a lot. If there was once presence and now there's absence, they don't ignore that. They interpret it. They analyze it. They try to understand the reason behind the change. But all of this happens internally. On the outside, they may seem calm, light, even indifferent. They may keep posting, talking to other people, following their routine as usual. And that's exactly what confuses people. Because you look and think, I guess it didn't affect them. But it did. It's just that instead of reacting emotionally, Gemini reacts mentally. And that kind of reaction is much deeper and often more decisive. Because while emotions can be temporary, conclusions are dangerous. And Gemini reaches conclusions. The more they observe, the more they understand. And the more they understand, the less they feel the need to ask, to confront, or to insist. They simply start forming a clear reading of the situation. And this can be both something positive and a problem. Positive side. This ability to observe before acting prevents unnecessary conflicts. Gemini doesn't jump to conclusions based on momentary emotions. They look for logic, patterns, coherence. This shows emotional intelligence and maturity. Challenging side. Overanalyzing can make them think too much and speak too little. Instead of clarifying, they may shut down. Instead of asking, they may assume. And that's exactly where everything starts to change. Because the moment Gemini stops reacting and starts only observing, they also begin, silently, to drift away. He changes the way he communicates. If there's one thing that defines a Gemini, it's the way they communicate. They're light, curious, present, and engaging. They talk easily, start conversations, reply quickly, and create connection almost effortlessly. But when they feel ignored, that changes. And it doesn't change in a dramatic way. It changes subtly. At first, you might not even notice. The replies get a little shorter. The enthusiasm fades. That spontaneous energy slowly starts to disappear. The Gemini who used to engage now just responds. The one who used to initiate conversations now waits. The one who showed interest now observes from a distance. And this is not by accident. Gemini starts adjusting their communication based on what they're receiving. If they feel a lack of reciprocity, they reduce what they give. If they sense disinterest, they pull back. If they feel like they're talking to themselves, they simply stop. And here's the most important detail. This is not a game. It's adaptation. Gemini doesn't like wasting energy where there is no exchange. So instead of insisting, they reorganize the way they express themselves. Real impact. The connection starts to weaken without conflict. There's no fight, no argument, just a shift in rhythm. And when you realize it, that conversation that once flowed naturally is simply no longer there. And the most curious part is that this can be mistaken for coldness. But it's not coldness. It's protection. Because for Gemini, communication isn't just about talking. It's about connecting. And when that connection feels one-sided, they don't see the point in continuing to expose themselves in the same way. Positive side. This ability to adapt shows social intelligence. Gemini quickly understands the environment and adjusts their behavior to avoid emotional exhaustion. Challenging side. This shift can feel like emotional distance. The other person might think they've lost interest, when in reality, they're just responding to what they're receiving. And there's one more thing almost no one notices. When Gemini changes the way they communicate, they also change the level of access you have to them. They start sharing less, opening up less, showing less of what they feel and think. And that is silent, but powerful. Because communication, for Gemini, is the gateway. And when that door starts to close, even slowly, regaining what once existed is no longer that simple. They redirect their energy. This is where a lot of people get it completely wrong. Because when you ignore a Gemini, it's not that they feel bad for a long time. It's that they decide not to stay where there is no exchange. And instead of insisting, they do something that changes everything. They redirect their energy. Gemini is movement. It's curiosity. It's a constantly active mind. So when a connection starts to fail, they don't stay stuck trying to fix it alone. They move. At first, this can be almost imperceptible. They start investing more time in other conversations. They get involved in new interests. They connect with new people. They explore new environments, new ideas, new stimuli. And this doesn't happen because of a lack of feeling. It happens because of an excess of awareness. Because for Gemini, Energy needs to circulate. It needs response, exchange, stimulation. When that doesn't happen, they don't force it, they redirect it. Real impact. While you're still trying to understand what's happening, they're already creating new connections, new routines, new priorities. And here's the most delicate point. This redirection is not temporary. The more time passes, the more they get involved with the new. The more they adapt to this new reality. And without realizing it, what was once a priority stops being one. You are not replaced directly, but you lose space. And you lose space silently. Positive side. This ability to move forward is one of Gemini's greatest strengths. They don't cling to what doesn't flow. They seek growth, movement, new experiences. This shows independence and emotional intelligence. Challenging side. This same movement can feel like sudden detachment. For the other person, it may feel like it didn't matter that much, when in reality, they just chose not to insist where there was no return. And there's something even deeper here. When Gemini redirects their energy, they also begin to rebuild their identity without that connection. They stop including you in their thoughts, plans, and day-to-day ideas. And that changes everything. Because the moment you stop being part of a Gemini's mind, you also start to stop being part of their life. And the most impressive part? They do this without announcements, without conflict, without explanation. It just happens. And when you finally realize it, they're no longer in the same place they once were. He disconnects emotionally. This is where the shift stops being subtle and becomes deep. Because when a Gemini reaches this point, it's no longer just about communication or behavior. It's about feeling. And the most impactful part, this disconnection doesn't happen all at once. It happens gradually. At first, there is still interest. There is still curiosity. There is still that desire to understand what's going on. But as the silence continues, as the lack of response repeats itself, something inside them begins to change. They start to feel less. Not because they wanted to, but because they needed to. Gemini realizes they are investing emotion into a space where there is no return. And instead of continuing to expose themselves, they begin to protect themselves. And protection, for Gemini, means emotionally detaching. Real impact. They may still be there, replying, interacting, maintaining some level of contact. But the intensity is no longer the same. The involvement is no longer the same. On the outside, everything seems normal. On the inside, it's not. They stop creating expectations. They stop imagining scenarios. They stop caring about details that once mattered. And that completely changes the dynamic. Because when Gemini loses emotional involvement, they also lose the reason to keep trying. Positive side. This ability to protect themselves emotionally prevents them from being drained in one-sided relationships. They learn to recognize when something isn't reciprocal and preserve their own energy. Challenging side. This disconnection can be hard to reverse. Because when Gemini truly detaches, it's not superficial, it's an internal shift. And there's a detail almost no one notices. Gemini doesn't announce that they've disconnected. They don't come out and say, "I don't feel anything anymore." They don't create a dramatic ending. They don't feel the need to explain. They simply change. They become more neutral, more distant, more rational. And little by little, that connection that once had exchange, lightness, and intensity turns into something empty. No conflict, no argument, no warning, just emotional absence. And the strongest part of all this is that when you finally notice this change, it's usually already too late. Because the Gemini who once felt, got involved, and cared is no longer there in the same way. They may even remain physically present for a while, but emotionally, they've already left. They simply decide and don't go back. This is where everything is defined. Because contrary to what many think, Gemini is not indecisive all the time. They may analyze, question, and change their mind during the process, but when they reach a real conclusion, something completely shifts. They decide. And when that decision happens, it's not impulsive. It's not emotional. It's not temporary. It's the result of everything that came before. The silent observations, the change in communication, the redirection of energy, the emotional disconnection. All of this builds an internal point where Gemini clearly understands that it no longer makes sense to continue. And when they understand that, it's over. Real impact. There's no argument, no final attempt, no last chance. The change already happened internally before it showed externally. And that's exactly what surprises people the most. Because from the outside, it feels sudden. It feels cold. It may even feel exaggerated. But for Gemini, it wasn't sudden. It was a process. Positive side. This ability to decide brings freedom. Gemini doesn't hold on to what doesn't evolve, what doesn't respond, what doesn't grow. They choose themselves when they realize there is no reciprocity. Challenging side. This decision can be final. Because when Gemini closes this cycle internally, they don't feel the need to revisit, reopen, or reconsider. And there's an even deeper point here. When Gemini decides, they don't look back with doubt. They look back with understanding. They've already processed what they needed to. They've already felt what they needed to feel. They've already thought enough. So there is no internal conflict. There is peace. And that peace is what makes everything irreversible. Because it's not pride. It's not ego. It's not a game. It's awareness. And when someone acts from awareness, there's no space to return to what no longer makes sense. That's why when you ignore a Gemini and they reach this level, you don't lose them at the moment they leave. You lose them much earlier, at the moment they silently decide it's no longer worth staying. And when that decision happens, they don't announce it. They don't explain it. They don't hesitate. They simply move forward. And this time for real. Do you see how it's not about impulsiveness? It's about process. Gemini doesn't react immediately. They understand, analyze, and only then decide. And when they reach that point, it's not a momentary emotion. It's a conclusion. In the end, ignoring a Gemini doesn't make them chase. It makes them see. And when they see enough, they don't fight reality. They adapt to it. Because a Gemini's greatest power isn't in speaking. It's in knowing exactly when to stop insisting. And after that, it's not pride. It's awareness. And if you made it this far, truly, thank you for being here until the end. That shows this message resonated with you on some level. And when that happens, it's not by chance. Now I want to ask you something simple, but very important. Comment 1313 below to confirm you received this message. It strengthens this connection and shows you're aligned with this kind of content. And if you want to keep understanding more about zodiac signs, behavior, and these truths that almost no one talks about, then join us. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, leave your like, and share this video with someone who needs to see this. Because sometimes a single message at the right moment changes everything.